All right, so week 6, largely going to be covering some functions that have to do with each of the data types. Don't want to go too in depth on each one of these because a lot of them are kind of, for lack of a better term, very self-explanatory. And so really like kind of working with all the different data types and obviously the different kind of functions that come with it. So for example, it'll talk about a literal string versus like a character, a bunch of different string functions. You can break it all apart. And great question already is a lot of this. So special characters. So when we use like special characters to kind of generate those, we have to use a function called char. So I'm actually going to try this because one of the questions is how do we make it show the actual special character, which I know has been an issue even for myself in the past. So we're gonna go through this and hopefully this time I remember. So I'm going to start command line client. We'll start there. All right, and we're going to go back here and we're going to just try this because I believe this shouldn't work here. And we will get to the UI map here shortly. Okay, yep. So basically there's a lot of weird things going on here. So in MySQL, we have various character sets that are used kind of underneath the hood. So, like what kind of character set do we want to display our Unicode with, or our actual characters? So MySQL, let's see what character set we're using. So and like I said, it should be defaulted to Latin 1, but the problem is there's lots of various things that can kind of impact that. Whoops, show. So here's all the various character sets that we kind of have here. Now, like it said it defaults to Latin 1. And there's a character set and then there's a collation as well. And they all kind of have a default. So by default, it's going to use Latin 1. I think for and correct me if I'm wrong, what did it say to use in the book? Is it
it's the bottom UTF-8 and the I think 3 or 4.
UTF-8 and before?
Mine had both of those throughout all the different settings.
Okay. Show character set in use. Oh, I don't know what database I'm even using. It should be the default MySQL show.
You can do a show variables like character underscore set
yes.
percentage, and it should show you everything.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, it's using UTF-8 and before. So I'm actually going to try to set mine to Latin. And actually, I'm going to use, what did I call this one? What did I call this database? I think I called it vehicle DB. Okay. Just to make sure.
So if you're to change the character set, it's per database, not per workbench instance.
Yes, correct.
Good to know.
Okay. So let's try this one more time. I still don't think this is going to work because of, we'll try it. Yes. Recycled char showing as hex. Try this. Okay. So now, I believe, let's try just 97. Okay. Let's try 128 TF8 MB4. Yes, I think let's try. There we go. Okay. So depending on your character set, sometimes the characters are supported and sometimes they're not. Now, I can't speak for the book itself, but we're going to take a look through some of the examples. But essentially, depending on the character set, some of them have the character and some of them don't. So I'd be curious which one this is using.
I think that's the example from the slides. And it doesn't say specifically, but
Yeah.
it's slide 8, and it's supposed to be like a C and then a U with the 2 dots, and then yeah, that's what it's supposed to look like right
Okay.
there.
Yeah.
That's
Yep. Let's try it with. I want to try with Latin one because that would be my best guess. And I don't even know if this is going to work here, but we're going to try.
it does not give you what you think. It's not
Got it.
looking like that one, but it does give you something.
Interesting. Not ASCII. We're running out of options here quickly. Latin. Interesting. Oh, using the ASCII character set. So, which one is that? 129. Again, this could be. Let's see, the second one, the third one is 130. So we're just gonna try 130 and see if we just get that one. And I think the question mark. So I think part of this has to do with the fact that the terminal has its own font. And whether that font supports it or not is another question. But anyways, that's a pretty deep dive. So ASCII, let's try this one. You know, we're going to jump right here to tools. We're going to try it on theirs and see what we get here. Question mark. The good news is we're not alone here. So, yeah, so let's look, because I think we can.
Okay. I think it is the terminal, but I just did it in Workbench. If you take that, there's an example from the book where they do the A, B, C, D, F, G, and then they do char 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103. And you put char with all the numbers in parentheses, and then you put the as ASCII after the parentheses, and it will give you the A, B, C, D, F, G as well. So wait, put your, so you can put the whole list of them, but you have to put the whole list in parentheses first, and then have the using after that. So your parentheses after the 130, and they don't make it a string. Just leave it as a number.
Got it. So
and a parenthesis after the 130. Yep. And then
it.
Get rid of the end parenthesis there. Oh, interesting. Well, it works in Workbench. So you have, so it's selecting a string of A, B, C, D, F, G, comma, and then you have the char with the numbers as ASCII.
Got it. Okay.
I put it in the chat, but
let's take a look. Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's basically just giving it a column name. The as is just the alias.
So that's still not actually it's not actually doing any of the conversion right there.
Yeah, because see, that just gives it a column name. So like I can say as,
oh, if you want to see the blob, you have to go to the Workbench, MySQL Workbench, and then in your preferences, go down to the SQL execution under SQL editor, click treat binary, var binary as non-binary character, and then hit OK. And then when you execute it, it will show you what it is.
Got it.
That's what it shows in the book. So
yes, so maybe it's just a weird, because that's empty. No. No, it's still running. Something. It says it's stuck. Interesting. Yeah, and that's why I think it's like something on the computer, because you'll notice that basically this broke this, trying to display that special character. So let me actually quit here.
But yeah, so getting it to work in Workbench, if you try to do it in the terminal, it still brings up your hex. So just like you said, it's a different format and you can't do the same thing.
Yep. So I think it's like something to do with the font that's set on the computer. So anyways, it's a wild chase to try to get that right, and no easy way, really. Okay, let's take a look here now that we're back in action. All right. Cool. So anyways, characters, and I think on the in the exercises, it never really asks like specifically what it will show. I don't believe. If you come across one that is like, oh, I'd have to, there shouldn't be any that you have to run to know like what it shows. So, but if that tends to be false, let me know. But yeah, for the most part, like I'm guessing because like we had luck with the ASCII because it's working, or whatever, because that's kind of what we use on the computers. This actually feels a little dated, or at least like what the string shows seems a little weird, because we were definitely not getting that with the ASCII character set. But string functions, yeah. So like I said, lots of different functions. Don't want to spend too in depth on them, because they all kind of, like any function, you kind of give it parameters and it kicks something out. So anyways, didn't want to spend too much time, but want to highlight that, different data types obviously have different functions. Like you can split a string up or find something in a string. Obviously arithmetic has its own functions. Same thing with dates, right? Like lots of different or temporal data, since it's technically date, time, timestamp. So, you can add to a date, you can subtract to a date, you can find the difference between two dates. Anyways, lots of different functions. A big one is the current date function. That one's kind of handy. Really, you can get any of the current kind of date, time, and timestamp pretty easily, which is super handy. But yeah, so again, don't want to go too in depth on these, because the one thing I do want to cover that's in here in the reading this week is our the MySQL insert, update, and deletes. So I know last week we already kind of talked about this a lot, so I again don't want to dwell too much on it, but just wanted to point out this is where these resources are. So because I know after the meeting last week, there was someone who said like, oh, like I haven't seen this before, am I missing something? And I said no, we're getting to it next week. The book never really covers it in depth, the insert, update, and delete statements, but I just wanted to point out that they are here. So you can go here and it'll show you how to insert data. But more importantly, at least for the final project, we can actually go to our schema. So like if we were doing vehicle DB, we can actually just right click on a table, copy to clipboard, and an insert statement. And so basically it'll kind of walk you through, inserting is how we insert a record into a database. So that's going to come handy. And if you haven't caught last week's video, I would highly recommend it if you're doing the final project, because we go over how to kind of set up your project using scripts, which I think is super, super helpful. So if you haven't caught that one, would definitely recommend it, because we're going to kind of continue to utilize this and other things as we talk through the final. So anyways, what we're here today, what I really wanted to cover is the UI map. So when we're working on the UI map, and like I said before, the way that the final project rolls with the course is actually perfect, because as we generate our seed statements, which we kind of got a little bit ahead last week, we're going to do a lot of this kind of generation of stuff. For example, if you want to track like when something was created, you can use current date, or current timestamp to kind of automatically put, hey, when I create this record, just insert the current timestamp. So that way, whenever the record gets created, it's always using the latest time. So anyways, lots of good kind of stuff to kind of kick off this week, but really wanted to show you how to format your UI maps. And I know I kind of sent an example of that out already, but we're going to do one that kind of uses this little mini database that I have here. So again, our final projects, we don't actually have to build a UI, but we have to somewhat design one and map it to our code. So we basically are going to envision what we want the UI to look like, and we're going to build all the database resources to power that view. So kind of my rule of thumb is that as we go through and build our UI map, people always ask me like, well, how much? And the answer is like, I like to show basically the main functionality of your product. So like if you're building a store, let people see your product, let people add something to their cart, let them check out. If you're, basically like the enough views to kind of get them through it. So the tool that I really like to recommend is called Excalidraw, excalidraw.com. It seems to work really good. And you'll see as I do this, there's a lot of like really nice features that will help you kind of do this very quickly. So yeah, so I'm just going to kind of jump into it. So with my database, what I have is a thing that manages tractor models, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a website that will let people browse these models. So they'll be able to see like the models, the information, and also allow them to add models themselves. So this is kind of like a almost like a wiki website where people can say like, oh, someone hasn't put this tractor in. So I'm going to go ahead and do it. And really, it's really any vehicle is kind of the way I've had it set up. So anyways, I like this tool because you can kind of very quickly wireframe things up. So again, I'm doing a database. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first start off by kind of like building like my screen. So here's my little thing. And when you do your lines, just so you know, there's a little option. You can do whatever you want, but there's like a sloppiness. So if you like nice crisp lines, you can do that, but then you have to be real precise. So I actually kind of prefer this one because it just kind of, you don't have to quite be as precise. Now I'm just going to add my little buttons over here. Again, it doesn't have to be pretty. We'll pretend we're on a Mac. I put them on the wrong side. So I guess we're not truly on a Mac. That's my Linux days coming at me. So, and then we need a search bar, I guess. All right. So there's our browser. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this, and this is what I really like. So inside of here, we can actually save things to a library. So because I have all these highlighted, I can click this little plus, and now I have this kind of screen here. And I also believe I can take this and lock them. So there it is. And I know I have duplicates. So what I'm going to do is find our one that's not, oops. There we go. Okay. Lock it. There we go. So now it's locked. So I can't move it, which is great. So now I'm going to build my first view. And like I said, kind of the general process here. So the first thing I want to do is allow people to browse tractors, but not only browse, but also search for them. So like a couple things going on here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to build kind of like like your general search. If anyone's used like KSL cars or any like search tool, I kind of want to like have like a drop down for make, right? So this is kind of like where you'll search. I'm going to say make. And what I'm going to do before I actually type in the make, I'm going to type in drop down. And I'll show you why here in just a second. So I'm going to kind of align this up here. And I don't think you can do triangles with this, so I usually do that, call it a drop down. And again, I'm going to highlight that and add it to my library. So now when I need more drop downs, I can just quickly do it. So I'm going to do make, and again, come over here, throw in my other drop down, and then model. So these will be little drop downs, and I'm actually going to show this one open. So I'm going to do a little drop down, and I'm going to add some text. Say John Deere and New Holland. Something like that, because your typical drop down that you can select. So we're going to kind of just mimic that being open. And then obviously we need our big search button. Now I'm kind of doing this just like a little messy. So, obviously it doesn't have to be fancy though either. And I'm also gonna, let's call it we'll just do that. All right. Search. And I'm actually going to put this in we'll put a little line here. It's going to let you search for one that'll let you search make model. But let's say I also just like want to display, let's say I want to display the most alphabetical makes, right? So let's put text and let's say, browse tractors. Let's make this larger. And we're going to do just like a list of makes. So this is where I really like this, is like you can kind of build like a template here. So I'm going to build like a row, and inside here, let's just add some text where I'm going to say, make and then you can kind of go from there. So let's do it a little smaller. So each one is going to have its own little box. Let's give it just like a little picture, a logo, right? Because each tractor has its own little logo. Since we can't do the logo for real, we'll just kind of do that, because that's where the logo goes. So I'm going to actually do this, add this to the library again, because we don't actually have to have all of our makes in here. And in fact, because I put John Deere New Holland there, but really when it comes to this kind of stuff where we're kind of doing UI map, we can just kind of throw in these little boxes that just say make, because obviously we know that they'll get filled based on our data. So there's our browse tractors, and we can take this and let's go. Make a couple rows of it. There we go. And we're going to obviously, let's give our database a name here, or a site a name. VehicleDB.com. All right. So, this is one screen that kind of lets us do a search and browse our tractors. Now, this is the fun, easy part. But we, like I said, anyone can envision like how a UI looks, but the real challenge comes from actually connecting things. So really there's two kind of pieces that are going on here. We have this search functionality. Well, really three. We have these drop downs that obviously are going to pull data that we already have. And then we also have a search that will actually, search based on the criteria we put here. So we need to not only populate these, but we also need to use that to search. And then also we have our list of makes down here. So what I like to do is I like to kind of label each one of these things with a code. And that code is really just like an identifier. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to link to this drop down here. So let's link to this. Oop, in the wrong way. So we're going to do an arrow. It's going to be red, and we're going to come here to make. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this make.r.1. And I'm going to make this smaller. So you'll notice that I called that make.r.1. And really that's kind of like the little piece of identifier that I'm going to use to kind of, I guess, connect our code. So we're going to start with that. And I'm going to do a couple more. So I'm going to take that and we're going to do one from here to the model. Same thing. We're going to call this model.r.1. Make sure it gets connected there so that we can move it. And then on our search, we're going to call this. Now, because the search has more than one thing, we're going to call this test case .1. So tc.1, test case.1. All right. So let's start with that. So I've kind of labeled these. So now what we need to do is I want to write the code that's actually going to make these work. So like in this case, we just want a list of all the makes. Now, I kind of know how this works on the back end, so I won't hold it against you if you don't. But basically, we just want a list of the makes, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over to my CRUD test case file, and I'm going to look for where and I called it manufacturer. We're going to pretend that manufacturer is make. But anyways, I have this select. So what I'm going to do here, because these are our CRUDs, and I'm actually going to real quickly just put a comment here, CRUD, so we kind of keep those separated. And then I'm going to do test cases. All right. So this one was our technically manufacturer make. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to label that. So to make it match for right now, I'm just going to say make.r.1. And the R stands for read, meaning that's a select statement. And so I'm just going to write the code that will do that. So what do we want? Well, we wanted a list of all of our makes or manufacturers. So I'm going to say select name as manufacturer name from manufacturer. I can run this. First, we got to make sure our database is selected. There we go. So there's our John Deere in New Holland. Now, the way that HTML actually works, if we were to go and actually say, oh, and again, I don't expect this, but this is just for fun tidbits of knowledge. But if we look at W3 schools dropdown, a CSS drop down. And I believe it's called a here we go, a select. So you can see here that each one of these has like a value. But the way this works is on the back side, because we give it a value, but we also want to give it something that will work, because we don't want to have it actually, I guess, like here, if I choose Volvo, the value that's returned is Volvo. Well, and as we've discussed, we don't really like working with the actual text of things, because it can change, it can get weird. So what we do is we select the manufacturer or ID. So there we go. So that way, when we run this, it will basically give us the manufacturer ID, the name of the thing. So that way, when we put it in there, we can use the name as what's displayed and the ID is the value. So this is make r.1. So there's the first test case we have. And you know what? I'm actually going to pull this test case and we're going to just put it right at the bottom. So we have our CRUDs, and then we're going to do our test cases down here. That way they can be all together. All right, so then we had our model.r.1. So let's do that one. Model.r.1. And this is going to be real similar. So we're going to select the model ID and the name for model as model name. Let's do that. Make it look clean. And there we go. Right now we just have a model B, but anyway, so that's what's going to run our drop-down menus, right? Because this data's got to come from somewhere. And if I were to add a new make, I want it to show up in the drop-down. So we want it to be dynamic. So let's move on to this test case 1, which is going to be a little bit more tricky, or seemingly tricky. It's actually not too bad, because again, we don't expect you to kind of make this. So what we're going to do is we're going to just create this test case that's going to just use some fake data. So in this case, I'm going to select what I have: manufacturer, model, and variant. So basically what we're going to do, because we could be looking for a specific variant. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull all the models and all the variants, basically every possible combination, by what they search for. And we're, like I said, again, we're just going to kind of put it in there, some fake data. We don't actually need this to work. So there doesn't need to be any actual like dynamic input from the user here. So we're going to select the manufacturer ID, the model ID, the variant ID from. And so again, because we have to pull this all from different places, we're going to do MF, MD for model, and V for variant. So manufacturer, MF, left join, model, MD. We do that on the manufacturer. Picked a hard word for this example, didn't I? Equals md.manufacturer. And then we're going to left join that with variant on md.model ID is equal to v.model ID. All right, so right now this is going to give me actually like all my data. So here's my manufacturer, my model, my variant. You'll notice that some of them don't really have all of them, which is great. That's why we use the left join, because maybe they search for it and, hey, there's not any models made for this. Okay, well, I want to add it. So But let's give these some friendly names because right now we just have the idea. So we're going to add the name as manufacturer, md.name as model, v.name as variant. And there we go. So you can see because we're using these left joins, we're pulling as much as we can. So now let's add the, hey, if someone were going to search for this, so we're going to say where manufacturer or I guess it's in this case just mf.name. Nope, I was right. Manufacturer ID, because remember we're going to return the code. So manufacturer.manufacturer ID is equal to, and in this case we can just make one up. So we're going to just say one, because if I choose John Deere from here, it's just going to be one. Now, if you didn't want to do it that way, you could actually just say where the mf.name is equal to John Deere. Right, completely up to you, however you want to handle it. But we don't actually have to put like anything dynamic there. Like I'm just going to pretend that someone chose John Deere. So they clicked on John Deere, click search. So when you hit search, this is the code that will run to pull the results, which is the perfect segue into our next thing. Because when we hit search, we want to show another screen that has our results. So I'm going to draw a little arrow here. I'm going to make this so if it's a screen navigation, we're going to make it green. So they hit search, it's going to take you over here. And I forgot to do this. So we're going to take and copy you. And really, I would save that to my model, but we're just going to do one more screen here. So, oh, and we forgot this. So anyways, but this is where it takes us over to there. All right. So now down here, because we need to load this. So basically we're getting all the makes and the logo. And I didn't put in my database that we're going to have a logo. So, like I said, there's going to be things like this that come up that you're going to want to handle, which is, I think, what the best part of having our scripts here are. So inside of our manufacturer, I'm going to just add a column and I'm going to say logo URL. So varchar, we're going to make it 250 nice and big, and it's nullable. So we're just going to leave it just like that. So logo URL, call good. Now I'm going to save this script because again, we're going to run this. So I'm going to first run my cleanup, get everything erased. It's all gone. I'm going to run my schema. Make sure it all looks good down there. I'm going to reinsert my data. But this time, because I changed this, so my manufacturer, I'm going to add a URL. And you know what? Let's just let's look up one John Deere logo. Images. An image in a new tab. We're just going to snag that guy and let's just put it right in here. There we go. So we'll just put the URL in for that one. Oh, and we need to put it here. So logo. There we go. All right. So now we're back in business. So now if I go back to my CRUD test case, we can make our other test case. So this one's going to be m dot, because we haven't done yet. So let's make a square around this. We're going to make it red. draw a little arrow here. We're going to call this make.r.2. Like I said, it doesn't have to be anything fancy, really just enough to kind of mark it so that if we wanted to go kind of look for what's going on here, we could. Well, that did some weird. Put you right there. There we go. Make.r.2. So make.r.2. And so in this case, we just need, it's going to be very similar to the one above. So we're going to do this same thing here. The only difference being is that instead of selecting the name and the ID, which we may want the ID depending on what we're loading here, so I'm going to keep it. We're also going to get the logo URL. There we go. So now we have the logo URL so that when we build our HTML, we can plop it in there for each one of them. Cool. So that is the first kind of view there. Does anyone have any questions so far? Is this making sense? Making
Hi,
sense? Yep.
sorry. Just so I just want to make sure I've got this right, that by doing that make.r.1, you're actually creating those drop down lists. So in the background, that's what'll show up on the front.
No, so what I'm doing here actually is doing anything. I'm simply like labeling this because like this isn't going to connect anything or be interactive in any sort of way.
Okay.
I'm simply just kind of like saying like, hey, I'm going to call this action make.r.1. And so that way, like when you turn this in, or if you're going to take this to an investor or a group of engineers, so like let's say you're going to take this to a web developer, he could say, okay, yeah, I'll build this, but on the back end, what do I need to do to populate this dropdown, right? And the web developer, he's going to say, oh, make.r.1, let me go take a look at your test cases. Okay, so if someone wants to, so I'll use this to populate the dropdown. So that way they don't have to like muddle through and figure out how it works. You've kind of already laid it out for them is kind of the point of this. So really this is more of just like a documentation to say like, oh, here's like how I would populate this dropdown, or like if someone hits search, what happens? And so I could come here and say, oh, TC1. Okay, I get it. Like it's just pulling this information, and yada yada.
So yeah, so the actual drop downs being created by the web designer and the programmers.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and towards the end of the course here, I usually try to build like a quick sample, because it's actually way more easy than what you think to make all this happen. Because it seems far-fetched, which is one thing that I love about this final project is, to actually build something that's functional, like on a web page, seems far-fetched. At least when I was in school, like I was like, holy cow, like if I could do that, like I'd feel amazing, right? And what's crazy is once you kind of learn how to build this database, if you've had even the simplest like PHP course, or even without it, just some simple HTML, we can display things from your database right on a web page, and like this stuff where it shows like a lot of things for every make. Like right now we only have 3 makes, so just show 3 boxes, but we can do that super easy because the data is kind of driving the experience, and we don't have to create things statically.
So this is our new to me. So is this kind of what they mean by like front end developer, and then the database is the back end developer?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of like a gap there. So our typical stack kind of like what happens is you'll have like your actual server that's kind of handled by like your your operations type team, IT. So someone has to kind of set up that web server. If we're talking like a web app here, so someone has to kind of set up that server, and that's like step one of the stack. And then the next layer is our database. So the database is usually handled by like, what you guys are learning right now. It's just database kind of engineers, database developers, kind of putting that all together. Then when we actually get to like the application layer, there's the two pieces. So there's a front end and the back end, because with any website that kind of has action that happens on the background, meaning it's not just static, there's dealing with the actual displaying things, but then there's the back end code that will kind of connect that to the database, do any logic, if any, and then kind of pass it into the front end. So when you talk about like a back end and front end developer, depending on like the company and how their structures are set up, oftentimes the back end developers also do the database development. It just kind of depends on how they're structured. But that's kind of the full stack. And basically, the front end developers, like if you're separated, will typically just handle UX, meaning like, how do I make this drop down, look nice? And they'll do stuff like this where, they'll build it and it'll just say, make your model. And then they rely on the back end developer to populate all the components. So they kind of actually just build the wireframe, especially if it's data driven. They build the static components, and then a lot of these things will change depending on the data. So they kind of work through those scenarios, which is why we provide them with set scenarios, so that way they can kind of make an idea. Like, so in this case, we kind of have an idea of, because he can says, oh, I can display 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I can display 16 makes without a scroll wheel. If we want to keep it that way, maybe we need to limit our query. So let's say he says, hey, I can't display more than 16 makes when we're browsing. So we could say, oh, hey, limit 16. And then all of a sudden, we're going to limit the number of records we return to just 16. Now, in this case, that was the wrong one. So we can limit
that. Or they
that.
just limit it on the front end side of what you can see.
Yeah. And so that's kind of like, like where, they can kind of make those calls. But that's what's nice is basically this whole exercise is to provide them like, hey, here's like the query I would run, because they ultimately will build it because they don't know how many options there are. So they'll build it as such, and then obviously if there's any hiccup, they'd go back and forth. But even like if you're doing like full stack development, this stuff is super handy in the kind of initial phase, because you'll find just like this, like, oh, I wanted a logo, right? I didn't have a logo in my database. It allows you to think through the whole process and kind of test case it before you really dive in and, waste a lot of time, like building a lot of stuff before you're actually ready, because you can kind of iterate on it without too much change. Yeah, great question. So yeah, really, we're just kind of, and this is as far as we get on the UI, because obviously we don't expect you to build like a whole functional application. But like I said, I'm going to try to like really quickly kind of show you at the end of the course kind of how easy it is to kind of pull one of these together. And I think you'll be amazed at like, wow, that's super easy. And I think it'll help you make sense. Like anytime you click a drop down menu, whether it's just to choose, hey, am I paying with Visa, MasterCard, or whatever, anytime you click a drop down, odds are you're querying a database and you just didn't know it. All right. Where are we on time? Okay, yep. So we are over on time. So I guess real quick, because I would do a couple more screens here, I guess, just to kind of finish up. What I would do is I was going to walk you through, hey, showing the search results. And then I was also going to show a form where you could add in the data to build make a new model and a new variant. So, so basically when you build those forms, you can just like if you were going to do any form, kind of like a Google form where, you just have empty text boxes and you fill it. And the nice thing is they're all predefined for us because we defined them. So if I was going to do, a manufacturer, this is what's nice about our CRUD statements is, hey, I actually already have one of those. So if I'm going to insert into my CRUD, and this is where it's nice to kind of keep these together because I changed this one. So in my CRUD statement, I'm going to insert into manufacturer, John Deere, the logo, or the URL, the logo. So, in this case, they only have two boxes. They're both text. So you could just give them two text boxes, one for the name, one for the URL, and hit save. And then it would run this code. So really quickly, pretend that this is not connected in any way. And we're just going to quickly build a add manufacturer. We're going to build a text box. I'm just going to put make name. Logo URL. And we're just going to add a button that says save. And let's make the background of this green. Why not? There we go. Save. So when they were to save this, we would run manufacturer. So I'm actually going to just do manufacturer.c.1 for create. So manufacturer.create1. And really the number, I'm just going in order. So nothing special there. But really what I could do, because like I said, once you kind of do your CRUD statements, we can immediately go to our test case. And I'm just going to add another line here. And I'm just going to say MD or manufacturer.c.1. Bam. Because when I hit save, granted that I typed in this information, this is what would happen. Cool. So I'm going to delete that. So there's an add manufacturer screen. So basically what I would do is I would build one of these for add a manufacturer, add a model, add a variant. And you don't have to build one for every one of your tables. That's just because mine is a simple thing. Like I said, if you were doing one that would, like a store, for example, I would do one that would let you browse products like this, like pretend these are products and you click on it, just like on Amazon. Show one that shows like the product page. Here's a picture of the product. Here's the price. Here's the name. There's a button that says add to cart. Click it. How do I see my cart? Cool. Checkout, those kinds of things. Kind of show like the general, like whatever the purpose of your app is, show like one kind of flow through it. And I would like to see at least like 3 or 4 screens. Something that really, like I said, highlights the functionality of your app. And if you have an app that's really just display only, like mine, mine could just be browsing stuff that already exists. I would ask that at least you do one that shows like creating something, right? Just so we can show like how a form works essentially. Cool. But I've rambled on long enough. Does anyone have any other questions about the UI map?
I have other questions.
Okay. Let's see.
So last week you're showing the CRUD statements. So for my project, I have join tables that use 2 foreign keys and there's not a primary key. So I can input or insert into that, but when I was trying to do a select, I'm not sure like what do I, because I'm not going to have a primary key ID because I've got the 2 foreign keys. So what am I trying to select, and how, like there's a whole bunch of layered select statements in there, and like just how do you process that?
For the CRUD statements, it's really just what I would do is, if you know, because really we just want to select things. So like for my CRUD statement, I select the ID, but if you have like multiple keys, like you could select both the keys. Or like, because like really we're not picky about this. If you want to select something that's useful, like for example, when we come down here and select the manufacturer name and logo, feel free to put that in there as your one, like if you're going to reuse it as a test case. So no, like really we just want to select from it. The only thing again that I don't ask is that you just select everything from table name, because that kind of defeats the purpose. It becomes redundant and pointless at that point. So that's why I say, like, if you know you're going to have a test case that's going to use it, throw it in there. If you can't think of one off the top of your head when you're doing it, just select whatever you think like most uniquely identifies that. So like maybe it's just the name of the manufacturer, for example. So no hard requirement there. Does that answer your question?
Maybe I'll have to think about this. So it just got pretty involved because, like, you don't want to choose anything with a specific ID because every time you rebuild, that's going to change. So everything that I'm selecting is using a select statement that's pretty involved to make sure that's the right one. So I've got to select for my first ID to select from the other table. And then I have a select for my second ID with a select statement inside of that, because I have to get the right information from the tables to the side, because there's nothing to just specifically identify. So it's really getting super nested. And so anything, and that's just my insert statement. So then to do anything else, it's your brain is really wrapped around a lot of things. But if you're just looking for basics, and it's harder to identify because it's a joined, it's a compound key. But if you don't really care and it's just like, okay, well, tell me the first part is somewhat irrelevant to the next, then I'll look into it.
Yeah. And if it gets redundant, like for example, when you're inserting your data and you have to, do all those select statements, kind of insert those foreign keys. If it becomes too redundant, I would say just throw in like the numbers, like maybe do it once or twice, just, to kind of demonstrate it, but then just throw in the number after that. Okay.
Yeah, it's I've got at least 4, maybe 5 of those joining tables where it gets pretty intense. So
okay. Yeah. If it gets redundant, just start throwing the number in, because realistically, like especially if you've set it up this way, where hey, I'm going to clean up and rebuild.
Right.
Theoretically, as long as you
clean up and rebuild. Lots of clean up and rebuild.
Yeah, as long as you like build it on like a clean setup to where, hey, I don't have any duplicates and the stuff I need is in the correct order. So like John Deere's always going to be one, right. Then you could throw the number in.
Okay. So yeah, once you've cleaned it up pretty accurately, it will stay the same.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it smarter to not do the 2 foreign keys and to actually have the primary key that's connected to the 2 foreigns, just to make that easier? Or
I'll be honest, that's my preference. Because there are a lot of places where you can say like, oh, these 2 foreign keys uniquely define this one. And in theory, and this is like my own opinion, in theory, to me, like that's great. And I would worry, I would get more excited about it if it's like, oh wow, I'm Facebook and I can save, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in disk space by doing this change.
Right.
Then maybe it would be worth considering. But in these cases, I'm a big fan of having a single column that uniquely identifies each record in each table, just because that way, even if it's like, oh, I'm talking to, engineering on the phone and I say, hey, we have a problem with this record in this table. Here's the ID, bam, you send it over, it's done. So that's kind of my preference and where I draw the line. Like I said, if I was like going to save a trundle of money by cutting out an ID of, someone like Facebook probably would, it probably becomes meaningful for them. But yeah, for the sake of simplicity, I would. But if you're already far along, I would say just keep it and use numbers. Like, don't worry about doing like the subqueries to pull your foreign keys.
All right. So just if I were to redo it differently, my foreign keys are listed as a primary key as well. So I've got the two foreign keys become the primary key together. So if I were to add an actual primary key, would they no longer be listed as primary keys because they're now like really just foreign keys?
Yeah, and somewhere it will say that it's defined as a primary key. So like, for example,
so all three of them could be primary keys because
no, so it won't let you define another one. So like, depending on how you go about it, if you do it through like the model builder, like the GUI,
right,
yeah, you'll just untick the ones and tick the new one, and when you reverse engineer it, it'll just work.
right.
If you're already past that and you plan on changing it in the code, you'll see something like this where it'll say something like this, like let's say variant ID and model ID were my combo primary key. It'd look like something like this. So at this point, you could just simply delete and retype or whatever to make that work.
Awesome.
If you're going to redo it all, it might be easier just to quick reverse engineer it, because most of your other resources should still somewhat work.
Right. I have a whole bunch of unique indexes though, and so that gets annoying too. But definitely possible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Great questions. All right. Well, I hope you guys all have a great week. If anything comes up, feel free to message me. But otherwise, yeah, hope you have a great week and good luck.